Well, thanks for staying with us on the program this morning. Let's now have our guest reviewer join us virtually from his residence in the nation's capital, Abuja, talking about the editor-in-chief of the Daily Courier newspaper, Mr. Seun Oni, who joins us now to review headline stories and discuss issues in the news. Hello, Mr. Seun. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Mr. Brian. Always a delight to be here.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have you. Let's begin with one of the main stories making rounds this morning. A vow by the INEC Chairman, Professor Amupitan, has said he would reduce electoral litigations, vowing that elections will now begin to count at the polls and not the courts. And in his tenure as INEC Chairman, losers will congratulate winners. What do you make of this vow?
A beautiful vow, and I think is an exciting one, if I should put it that way. But just to add that a number of factors he adduced that we ensure that premise, rather the conclusion, would become a reality. I really doubt if they are within his control. In economic analysis, there are always premises on which conclusions are built. And a few of the things, like he said, even from his inaugural speech at the INEC headquarters last week, and the same submission he made while he was a honoree at the law lecturers meeting that happened in Kogi State, where some of the headlines we saw in the newspapers today were actually made. Some of the premises include the fact that political actors, in this instance political parties, will need to conduct their primaries, beginning from their nomination processes, according to the books. They have to do it thoroughly, following the guidelines of the Electoral Act. He mentioned also that the security agencies will have to up their games, and all the stakeholders in the election value chain will have to play their part. He also assured that INEC on his part, being the umpire, will ensure that it does everything possible to the extent that the loser will be able to come clean and congratulate the winner, which had been the major bane of the array of litigations across the various courts in the land. So, like I said earlier, that's the expectation of the average Nigerians. But how far he'll be able to rein in our politicians, who, by the way, by my opinion, and I think I've made this position clear on this platform severally, that in my opinion, INEC has always bear the brunt about the lack of transparency in our electoral system. But sadly, I think it's unfair, because the greatest culprits, in my opinion, are the politicians. And that's my fear. With all the vows, this particular one that Professor Amupitan is actually making again, will our politicians allow him to play by the books, or they will, as usual, find a way to shove everything called constitutionality and legality down the trash bin? So that's where we are. The days will really tell.
Now, let me borrow from your opening remark where you cited economists, the phrase ceteris paribus, all things being equal. Particularly in this case, all things not being equal, based on the fact that you cannot establish nothing on something and expect it to stand. This brings me to the Electoral Act. In recent weeks, citizens seem to be more aware of provisions of the Electoral Act, speaking to party primaries, with the case of certain Senator Ahmed Lawan versus Mechina, where the former gained the ticket despite not contesting in a primary. Or do you think that with the existing Electoral Act 2022, which is subject to amendments pending the passage of the Electoral Act 2025 as amended, would enforce these powers to enforce such laws that even with the might and caprices of the political class, they would not be able to subvert these corners?
That's actually my fear. You have cited one out of a gamut of cases and examples that we have as a nation. Sadly, we often just pigeonhole INEC. And I quite agree with a session of the National Assembly. But I must add ab initio that I think that is just playing smart, because I don't see that person in both chambers, the green and the red chambers of the National Assembly. I don't see it passing. But it's good that one of them could at least reason enough that for once, the burden of proof should not be placed on the losers in an electoral contest. That maybe we should flip the coin and now put the burden of proof on the election umpire and court and explain why the court should agree that the person they claim won actually won the election. Unlike what we have now, when you go to the court, you are coming to prove what lawyers or what our legal jurisprudence have called termed beyond all reasonable doubt, that you are actually the winner and not the person that INEC declares the winner. I think that way the need to be a bit much more transparent would push INEC to take his duties more seriously. But on the other hand, the example you cited in the Lawan Machina case in Yobe State comes to mind, where our law books were very clear that the moment you have bought a ticket for a certain position and the window for replacement and all the rest have passed, and you can't come use through the back door to replace the names of people who had already bought forms and their names have been forwarded to INEC for other offices. And we saw it happen. Ahmed Lawa, the Senate president at the time, went, purchased form for the APC presidential primaries. He lost out, and somehow through the back door, he came to shove aside the man who was already holding the ticket for the senatorial contest in Yobe State there. Sadly, the point both of us have actually made this morning, ceteris paribus. INEC were very clear that that would not happen. We have to give the flowers to the immediate past chairman. It was very clear across many that the laws are very clear. But unfortunately, it went through our courts, and somehow the laws were changed midway into the game. And that's why we have, I think perhaps the longest serving senator today back in the red chamber, the former president of the Senate, Ahmed Lawa. That's how he got the ticket back again, even though the Electoral Act was very clear that that shouldn't happen. And it wasn't the only one. We have a number of other persons also who were also beneficiaries of such arrangement. And so that's where we have found ourselves. There are many actors in ensuring that we have an election that the entire world can beat the chest and say that is credible, is fair, and the process can be adjudged incorruptible. But sadly, INEC is just one out of these many stakeholders. How fair, how incorruptible will our politicians conduct themselves, in my opinion, is the greatest determinant of the fairness of any election in Nigeria. Not really INEC, as many had actually thought.
Now, still sticking with this vows made by the INEC chairman at the 56th NALT conference here in Abuja, he commended the National Assembly for progress made on amending the Electoral Act, as it were, talking about the need for collaboration to strengthen existing legal frameworks. Now, when we look at the existing Electoral Act, section 29 and 82 and 80 to be specific, that speaks to the provision to enforce disqualifications for parties that fail to comply with provisions of the law. Does it behove on INEC, since this promise is pre-election, even before the matters are subject to litigation? Does it behove on INEC to enforce these laws, or is it pending the institutionalization of a certain National Electoral Offences Commission? It's a big debate in public space.
Maybe you also need to add to the premise you have laid precedence of courts.
Of court, exactly.
Here, INEC comes hard on a political party for not doing the right thing, and the court goes to bemoan INEC that INEC has no right to determine what happened within the internal arrangement of a political party. So that is also part of the premise. So we have seen this again and again, that in some instances, people might come and tie it. They might say maybe because the parties involved are not the parties in power, but I've not seen anybody who comes out and say what INEC is saying in those instances are not the right thing. But they might say, oh no, but another political party did it and they did not say anything. That's a different ballgame. But where in a few instances where INEC had actually put his foot on the ground and insisted that the law must be followed to the letter, we have also seen our court come out and suddenly midway interpreted, and that's their job. It's the job of the judiciary, of course, to interpret the law. So courts will come out, interpret the law in a way that conforms more to legality and not to the letters and the details of the law. So here we are confused. The Electoral Act says one thing, and the position of the law courts, and this is often, this type of inconsistency is arrived in the lower court, the high court, and sometimes even to the court of appeal. So we have all these variables. How far we are able to manage these multivariables will determine if all the vows by Professor Joash Amupitan will become just a facade or become a reality.
Well, let's move on to another critical issue making rounds: the rejig in the nation's military, particularly in reference to the new service chiefs. And the meeting held with President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, news greeting the front pages this morning is that they're supposed to revisit the existing security strategies in a bid to rejig and find one that better strategizes towards defeating banditry and terrorism in the country. First, I'd like your opinion on the caliber of new service chiefs, although one has been retained from the previous batch, and secondly, on the task ahead of them.
Well, I've been one of the very loud voices that there is no reason keeping a service chief who is not performing till he exits office. Many hold contrary opinions, and I think they are entitled to their opinion. And one of the contrary opinions is the fact that each time you relieve the service chiefs, those sitting at the top echelon of our military, in that manner, you will have to also factor the fact that several other generals will have to also exit the system. That's if you have junior officers privileged to be appointed to that cadre, that class of service chiefs. As reasonable as that line of thought might really have been, you must also factor that security of lives and property is actually the primary cardinal function of government. And what we have seen in the past 2 months, if you could recollect, we suddenly had what I would call a serious relapse in parts of the country that have not been known to be under any very serious insecurity challenge. Quickly, I will call states like Kwara, part of Ogun State, and likely part of Edo State and Delta State. These states, usually before now, were not always in the news, but suddenly we saw how kidnappers, bandits, and in some cases, it's becoming almost a weekly occurrence that there are kidnapping across some of these states. And it just seems that people who are sitting at that part of, at that top echelon of our military hierarchy have lost idea. But you must not also forget there was a primary issue, which of course was the alleged foil coup attempt by some senior military officers. The villa had actually come to dismiss it, but the event after the dismissal have actually shown that the saying in this part of the world that there is no smoke without fire might actually be the truth. So, fingers are crossed. The military officials, the senior military officials that have been in detention, will know what their fate will be in the coming days, because I know definitely their families at some point would have to speak on the fate of their breadwinners. The people that have been appointed, their credentials, I think, except for Lieutenant General Oloyede, who has been in the public glare, and the Chief of Defense
Staff.
Intelligence,
Yeah.
who had been with us before now. The three I think two others, three others, the Army Chief, the Naval Chief, and the Air Force Chief. In my opinion, if you go through their CV, they seem a bit intimidating. But we are hoping that they can convert those intimidating credentials into boots on the ground when it comes to actual delivery and performance. Like I always say on this program, Nigerians are actually not asking for so much. I think for now, we are not expecting a military that would overnight start producing precision missiles, that will start producing some high-tech ammunitions that will turn us to superpowers overnight. That's not what we're asking for. And Nigerians are just saying, we have called terrorists in the northeast ragtags. Can we just nip it in the bud? We have called bandits and kidnappers jobless young guys who really don't know what next to do, untrained guys. Can we just, for once, put an end to their nuisance value in the society? And the internal skirmishes we have here and there in the southeast and some very isolated parts of the country. Can we just, for once, ensure that it comes to an end? And what we have now become maybe isolated incidences, not this account of mass killing in societies, and we now put ourselves under the global radar, whether it's a Christian genocide or it's just an isolated genocide that has no religious coloration. It is a mediocre performance of our service chiefs over the years that actually led us to this place where the US Parliament will be sitting down to be having very nauseating conversation about our nationality, whether they should come and arm people in order to nip in the bud what they call the massacre of Christians and stuff like that. If we have effective military generals who are dishing the right orders to their to the soldiers in the battlefront, and we can just put these things at bay. And we don't wake up to entire villages being massacred in our history again. I think that's just what Nigerians are asking for. And from the credentials I saw, I believe they are up to the task. And if we just make it part of our standard procedure as a country, that when you bring service chiefs, after 6 months we don't get the result, let's fire them and bring some guys in. I think that way we might begin to see people standing tall and proving a point that they can actually occupy that office, not on account of federal character, but on the account, the strength of their military training across some of the finest and the best military institutions in the world.
Now, well, on that 6 months performance period you're proposing, under the current reviewed harmonized term of service, it provides for a 2-year tenure. Although under the APC administration, bless the soul of the late President Muhammadu Buhari and now President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, these decisions to rejig the upper cadre has forced over 500 generals into early retirement, despite the burden of insecurity greeting the country. Do you think that this early retirement somewhat contradicts our body language towards curbing terrorism within the country?
So, when I hear argument as such, I just think we are also not following the current global military doctrine. You could recollect a few weeks ago that Hexet called, who is now the head of the U.S. military, what is now reconfigured as the Department of War, converged all the, I think from 2-star to 4-star generals, convert them in a meeting. And the instructions were clear. Unfit generals will no longer be tolerated in the U.S. Army. It was some of the snippets of the meetings were televised by highly respected media houses globally. That is the recent military doctrine. You can't be a general and you don't have a scar. You can't be a general and you can't, bring in what we call strategic instructions that will ensure that insecurity in part of the country. Maybe you're a brigadier general and the brigade under you, what we call ragtag bandit, will run over entire military brigades and cut away. And that type of general, the next day, we say he should go and sit for promotion exam to become a major general. I think that is unacceptable just because we want to keep generals. It doesn't make any sense. And we saw that just a few weeks ago, the military had to recall some generals. I really don't know how they dealt with them. And in that meeting with Exet, it was very clear. If you know you are too fat, if you know basic military routines, you will not be able to do it, just resign or else we fire you. It was that clear. So I think that argument really does not hold water. What are we doing with thousands of generals if things like kidnapping in certain states have persisted for a decade? Yeah, we can talk about terrorism and say maybe the finances and some of our porous borders have been the reason why it has become intractable. But we have had confined incidences of kidnappings on the highway in Kogi and in a few other places in the country. But we've not been able to bring in order. We have relative peace for a few weeks, and again, we go back to the status quo ante, and these guys will start kidnapping on that route. And we have these generals sitting in offices, collecting fat pegs and salaries. We have to have a rethink. I know that the harmonized document, takes 2 years, but that 2 years will be on the prerogative of the president. If he sees that they are not performing, even after 2 months, he can fire them.
Now let's come to the.
My only concern.
Yes, please land with your concern.
Okay, my only concern is that when you fire people, for instance, in a class of, maybe let me use the example of 40, why not also consider other generals in that class of 40 if they can perform like their classmates, rather than jump down to class of 42, 2 years they are junior, and you have the entire class of 41 have to resign from the army. And I think those are the delicate balance that we need to get right as a country.
Now, on the point where you mentioned no smoke without a fire, more or less insinuating that some of the street talk on an averted coup that also gained some future across media pages seems to have some deducible notes to take away following this rejig. Do you think it can be? Would I say, is there a correlation between this rejig and that rumor?
Please, can you repeat that question again? I'm lost.
My question is on the no smoke without a fire, talking about most of the rumors that made rounds that there was a planned coup which was averted. Do you see a correlation between this rejig and those rumors?
Absolutely. That's the exact point I was making. That the way and manner that the service chiefs were relieved actually points to something. Don't forget that the service chief in charge of intelligence, Major General Udode, was one of the two that was retained. And the information that filtered after the alleged coup plot was that it was his agency that actually intercepted the conversation among the senior military officials who were planning the coup. So, in the coming days, they will definitely have to come out and tell us what really happened. It's a strategic thing. It's not healthy for a government to start pursuing military officials under the guise that they are planned coup. It can be demoralizing. It can send the wrong signals to the international community. And don't forget that we are having a ripple of coup across the continent of Africa. We had Madagascar, we've had a few other countries who are just trying to rule their losses from such failed and prevented coup plots. So it's not actually in the interest of Nigeria to go on the front of newspaper and start explaining that we foiled a coup a few days. It might have a negative impact even on our business climate. So we understand that. But like I said, there is no smoke without fire. So something close to that actually happened.
Well, quite interesting developments. We'll continue to revisit them in the coming days as we have more facts to back these arguments. But in moving on, the 1st of November seems to be a tentative date for an indefinite strike by the National Association of Resident Doctors, who this morning are of the position that they are owed up to the tune of 38 billion naira in earned allowances by the government. And they are listing 19 demands to be met on or before the 1st of November to avert this industrial action. Give us your take on this development with some inside news as reported by your media outlet as well.
This case is actually not a new issue. The resident doctors, NAD, Nigeria Association of Resident Doctors, that's the name of the association. They've actually been trying to use backdoor channel to have their grievances addressed by the federal government. But somehow, we have actually not seen the federal government reciprocate. They went on strike at some point. People came and had to tell them you have to go back instead of down tooling. Why not continue the conversation with an assurance from the federal government side that their concerns will be looked into. Sadly, weeks and months after that conversation, nothing serious has been, no progress had actually been made. And this just goes to speaks to the type of leadership we have as a country. It's the norm. Labor unions will raise issues. They will forward their demands to federal government. Let me pick example of ASU in this instance. ASU wrote a covert letter to President Tinubu because before his victory at the polls in 2023, he actually sent a delegation to ASU. I'm speaking based on privileged information. He sent a delegation to ASU to have a conversation about their position. And he promised them that if he eventually becomes the president, one of the first things he was going to do is to ensure that their grievances were quickly met. And I can tell you authoritatively that leading that delegation that had that conversation with ASU was the current, or actually is the current chief of staff to the president, Right Honorable Femi Gbajabiamila. He eventually won the election. 1, 2, the third year into the saddle. ASU's demands, which have been documented in black and white pre-election, have not been met. They now sent covert letter to him, no reply. They had to now escalate it, leak the letter to the media, yet there was no reply. They gave ultimatum, there was no response, until the universities now shut their doors. Everybody started running. Let's talk to ASU. The Speaker of the House of Reps, Tajuddin Abbas, had to intervene. The Senate wanted to intervene. The presidency started sending different people. We saw the Minister of Finance, so different people started having meetings with ASU. Must we always behave that way? It's also the same with what we are saying with resident doctors. They've given ultimatum, they went on strike, they asked them to come back, they returned back to work with the promise that their demands will be met. They went back, they resumed work, nothing again was said about their demands. How do you run a country that way? I can assure you, on the night of October 31st, the Minister of Health, Professor Patti, might call a meeting so that they will not go on strike the following day. I think it's sad.
Well, in keeping with this tradition that seems to have lingering negotiations and renegotiations with persons saddled to chair renegotiation committees, that has become a sort of tradition in the country, and owing to the sensitivity of the sector being discussed this morning as it bothers on health and the shortage in that sector as it were, how much of an onus does it serve or need to expedite settlements, or would I say demands that are met to avert this action?
I think the precedents are there. A few times where we have our hospitals shut. We are just a nation that cares very little about statistics. The statistics are there. I could recollect one of the strikes. I had a medical emergency and I needed to visit the Kubwa General Hospital, the part of Abuja where I stay. Unfortunately, at that point, we only had consultants, nurses, and a few other health professionals on call. The hospital was rowdy. Of course, I was unable, because myself, I was not very strong. I couldn't do so much of news gathering job there. But the environment was chaotic. You could see patients where a number of people had to be referred to private hospitals because there were no sufficient hands to handle these people. So that means we are talking about lives being lost. We are talking about people's health being endangered, and several other factors that any serious government really does not want to compromise. But unfortunately, we really don't have such serious government. We have a government who wants to be politically correct, who wants to prioritize things, in my opinion, that really shouldn't take priority. We have resident doctors asking for 38 billion in allowances that have not been paid. And just a few days ago, I don't think it's up to a week, that we received a red letter from the Ministry of Health claiming that it has sent some hundreds of billions shared among all the primary health centers littered across the wards across the country. That's the type of government we have. I can tell you for free, the tone of the letter already tells you there is another money for guys. Because how do you dole a money that is meant for words, and you are writing a red letter to now tell everybody, go to your own word so that you know how much is coming. Religious groups, traditional rulers, all of you, sit down and talk how you want to spend the money. Have you ever seen any serious government disburse money in such manner? You really don't know what the money will be meant for. You disburse the money, then people now go and talk what they want to use the money for. What if we gather there and say we want to share the money around, that we have enough things in our own health center? It's such that is ironical, really. It is.
It also calls for great concern as well.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. How do you disburse money? You're not able to go and plan how they will spend it. Yet you have a very important segment of the health sector. The moment most of the doctors you see in our hospitals are actually resident doctors. So every time they down tool, it affects the operations of the hospitals across the length and breadth of the country. And we are not taking them seriously because I think it's just more like an attitude of who cares? You guys can do whatsoever you like, and it shouldn't be.
Now, there's also the aspect of a red letter. I don't know if you've seen the red letter making the rounds, one written by the Honorable Minister of Health and Social Welfare, asking Nigerians to at least follow the money and be involved in disbursements of money to health centers across their communities. I don't know if you've seen that letter making the rounds.
That was the letter I referenced while I was discussing a while ago. It was released just barely a week ago. All right. Money has been disbursed. They now ask religious leaders. I read the content of the letter. Religious leaders, traditional rulers, and other stakeholders to go and have discussion on how the money will be spent across their wards. Who does that?
Well, interestingly, I just had to reference it again to buttress the point you were making earlier. But then again, it's with the notion that citizens need to be actively involved in following the money. At the point of disbursement, do you think it is too late for citizens to have any input in that regard?
No. The way, this is about policy, it's about the whole gamut of policy process. Policy itself is multifaceted or multi-phased. I think that's a better adjective. It's multi-phased. You have the policy enunciation. From the policy enunciation, that's how you craft out what do they need, because the needs across the wards in the country are not the same. There are certain wards, for instance, in the FCT here, where all they needed are more high-tech facilities. But if you come to my ward in Umokekiti, in Ekiti East local government of Ekiti State, the rural center there is one that even most of the people in the community don't want to go there to meet their for medical needs, because I can tell you from the flip of my hand that if you go there, you can't get, I think the commonest drug should be paracetamol. You can't get paracetamol in their drug dispensary. Uh, Most of the women prefer to go to some of these private clinics for deliveries, because you don't have decent manpower to handle deliveries there. So the needs there definitely will not be the same with the one in Wuse, the one in Maitama Sokoro, and you have that across the length and breadth of the country. So the first job in policy crafting is to know the peculiar needs of these places. So the release of funds should be to meet these
All
peculiar
right.
needs.
All,
And so when releasing funds, you are
all right, Mr. Shewan, sorry to cut you there in your thoughts, but we must take a break to have a commercial. And I'm afraid when we come back, we might not have time to continue. So I must sincerely appreciate you for being a part of the program this morning. And I'm wishing you the best of the rest of your day.
thank you so much. Such a good one. And please do have a beautiful day too.
Thank you.